Today on One Body to Love, we're diving into a conversation I know so many of you will relate to. I'm joined by Marilee Pumple, a non-diet registered dietitian, late identified ADHDer, and co-founder of Little Spuds Nutrition. Marilee has carved out a unique and much needed space at the intersection of ADHD, eating disorders, and intuitive eating. If you've ever wondered why meal planning feels impossible, why hunger cues seem to go missing, or why evenings are the hardest part of the day with food, you're not alone. Marilee brings both her professional expertise and her lived experience to this discussion, and together we'll unpack how ADHD traits like impulsivity, sensory sensitivities, and executive functioning challenges can shape someone's relationship with food. This is a conversation full of compassion, validation, and practical takeaways. Whether you identify as neurodivergent or simply find yourself struggling with the push and pull of food and structure. Welcome to One Body to Love, where we're rewriting the rules around food, body image, and self-acceptance. I'm Dr. Meredith McKenzie, therapist, coach, and your guide to a life free from diet culture and food guilt. If you ever felt stuck in the cycle of binging, restricting, or struggling to feel at home in your body, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll explore emotional eating, body image, and joyful movement through solo episodes, expert interviews, and real-life coaching sessions. Because your body is not the problem. This is your space to learn, heal, and finally break free, and to discover what it means to love the body you're in. So thank you, Marilee, for coming on the podcast. I'm so excited to speak with you in this format. I know the times that we've spoken before, it's been maybe about client referrals and that type of thing. But do you want to introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know you yet?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. So I am a dietitian specializing in eating disorders and ADHD, and I've worked in this area I've worked in eating disorders for 7 years now, and I've been working with ADHD for the past 3 years and kind of specializing in that area since my own lived experience with getting diagnosed as a late identified ADHDer. And yeah, my practice has just evolved so much since then. And I really love this unique intersection of working with neurodivergent folks on their relationship with food, because I didn't realize how much of the neurodivergent piece really intersects with eating and vulnerability to eating disorders, and just how we think and interact with food on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. You've carved out such a unique space as a dietitian working with that intersection of ADHD and eating. What led you to that focus?
Yeah, so I've always been passionate about working in eating disorders. I have my own lived experience of having an eating disorder when I was younger, and never getting formal treatment. And I reflecting back, I know that ADHD is a big part of that, undiagnosed ADHD. And so getting diagnosed later in life definitely led me to this work. And I just love how I can relate to people so much, and just naturally I have a lot of empathy, but my empathy for neurodivergent folks talking about their relationship with food, I feel it so much, because I just know what that feeling is like, and having practitioners have no idea what you're talking about, or providing recommendations that just don't align with the needs that you're sharing, and are completely out of touch. They have no idea how what they're recommending could be harmful for someone.
Well, even it sounds like it. I've been in that situation too, similarly, where I'll be speaking with a client and I'll be like, hey, well, think about this way of, approaching it. And they simply won't do it, because that's just not the way their brains are designed to be able to function. So it's like, well, okay, that sounds good, but am I actually going to follow through on that? And then they feel like they failed in some way, or they're not doing what's recommended for them.
Yeah. And being mislabeled often in treatment too is quote unquote non-compliant, or unmotivated, or not ready for change, when we're just really not assessing people properly around their own lived experience, and how the things that are difficult or barriers for them can actually be related to how their brain is physiologically designed.
Mm-hmm. For someone who's new to the idea, how would you describe the link between ADHD and eating behaviors?
The short version would be like ADHD brains are wired for intensity and immediacy. So it could mean like irregular hunger and fullness cues. It could mean impulsive eating behaviors or overwhelm. It's not related to a lack of quote unquote willpower. I think the thing that it really stands out to me the most with the relationship between ADHD and eating is that like neurodivergent folks live in a world that's not designed for them. It's designed for neurotypical people. So if your brain just reacts differently, thinks differently, processes information differently, prioritizes information differently, like you just exist in a world that you have to like figure it out, and oftentimes like especially if you're undiagnosed you don't really understand why is it so easy for everyone else and not me, like what's wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of neurodivergent folks live in this like constant shame spiral all the time. They're just like constantly shaming themselves or being hard on themselves, and it or they're masking to fit into the norm, which is exhausting. So like to just like be perceived as someone who's not neurodivergent, or to just like try so hard to like meet these social norms, it can be extremely exhausting, and people get really burnt out. So
Mm-hmm.
they might have periods where like, you know, things are working really well for them, and then periods where they just like can't even function and they don't understand why. So like interestingly, a lot of like women or assigned female at birth people are diagnosed later with ADHD because they can be very high masking.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can, you know, go through this long journey of trying to understand what other mental health issues are contributing to this and not really finding an answer. But oftentimes they're struggling with like executive dysfunction, like forgetting to eat or forgetting to shop or living in chaos. Sometimes they're eating and sometimes they're not. They might have like differences in, you know, how they experience sensations in their body, which we call interoception.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not be able to tell like what is true hunger or what is true fullness, or they're hyper focusing on something and their, you know, their hunger cues are, they're inconvenient at that point because they're finally able to focus on something that is important to them. So other things get pushed to the side a little bit, but that can make you really vulnerable to other things, or like underfueling, emotional dysregulation and impulsivity just makes you really vulnerable to engaging in disordered eating behaviors, whether it's intentional or not.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is like almost an interesting intersection that I see in the work that I do with clients. I have some training in ADHD assessment, so looking for those little nuanced pieces I think is something that I'm working on becoming more attuned to, though I am not diagnosed with ADHD myself. I think also anyone listening could probably relate to is that executive functioning is in some ways like on a spectrum. So I think it's become really popularized that like, oh, I think I have ADHD. And yes, there are many people who have gone undiagnosed, but I think it's okay for someone also to say, I also struggle with meal planning and doing the grocery shopping and then the actual preparation and then eating what it was that I made. So I guess like anyone listening, if you don't have ADHD, you can also probably relate to some of the things that Marilee is going to talk about today. The intersection that I often see is like trying to tease apart what is maybe eating disorder related or disordered eating related and what is maybe a symptom of ADHD. And then, you know, how those overlap, how they maybe influence one another. Yeah, and we hear a lot about impulsivity and ADHD, and what do you wish more people understood about the emotional side or how it shows up in eating?
Yeah, such a good question. So like, even just what you were saying about like starting to explore more in like assessment and stuff. So like one thing that I do when I'm assessing somebody, and I often just like whether they've disclosed or not, like it's pretty obvious to me if we speak the same language, if there's like neurodivergent traits. And so
Well,
I'll
yeah,
just
what are you
ask
looking for?
somebody.
Like, what's a telltale for you?
Well, just like so, like sometimes people will be explaining like, oh, like I try to do this and it doesn't work for me, or try to do that, it doesn't work for me, or sometimes I can eat really, really well, and but then other times I just like can't do it, or I'm binging all the time, or I'm purging, or some of those more like impulsive behaviors, or Sometimes it might be like I isolate myself a lot. It kind of depends on like what type of neurodivergent person it might be. But usually I'll just say like, are you neurodivergent? Just to like start there. And it, interestingly, it'll either be like, yes, I'm diagnosed, or I think I am, or I've thought about it, but I'm not really sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're like, yes, I am, or I think I am, then right away, I want to ask them, like, how does that show up for you? Like, what are the traits you've identified that you notice are different than like maybe like your peers or people that you know to not be neurodivergent? Or they're really good sometimes at saying like, I have all neurodivergent friends, and we, struggle with all the same things, or we, do these things in the same way. A common one that stands out to me sometimes is like repetitive eating.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they have some foods that they like really like and they stick to quite consistently, and it doesn't feel like a super disordered food.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's that kind of teasing apart. But like, yeah, hyper focusing on things. The impulsivity one I find is easier to ask about once I know more about their like neurodivergent traits. So if they're, for example, saying like they have a lot of distress around eating, or they don't eat anything during the day and they're binging at night, then I can assess more around that impulsivity of like, are you not eating during the day because you're trying not to? Are you not eating during the day because you're not thinking about it and you're distracted with something else? You're not eating during the day because you take medication that, suppresses your appetite.
Mm-hmm.
In relation to ADHD, are you not eating during the day because you are staying up way too late because you have a hard time sleeping in half the day, forgetting to get groceries, not making food, ordering DoorDash? It's kind of like this chain event
Mm-hmm.
of things. So that to me kind of highlights more of that like impulsivity. And then if they do have an eating disorder, or I've assessed them for like purging behaviors, for ADHD in particular, like the vulnerability around a compensatory eating disorder is very high. And my kind of thought to that is more like, if we've lived in a world that's telling us that eating too much is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and if we associate the sensation of fullness to eating too much, or if our body is changing, and then you have, with ADHD, there can be implications to like how you regulate your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're dysregulated and impulsive, the vulnerability to purge, or to like quote unquote try to get rid of the food, which we know doesn't actually happen, is really, really high.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a way of coping with the situation and kind of creating that faulty sense of relief.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I see that a lot in terms of impulsivity
Mm-hmm.
and like some of the ADHD stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something I just want to clarify for anybody listening, because this has actually come up in client sessions before, is that I think there's often this misconception, if you're not purging, that you don't have bulimia. And that word compensatory behavior is, a bit of a, insider jargon of, it's how are you compensating, or how are you coping with that distress you're feeling? I don't feel okay that I ate this, and you're feeling a lot of emotions. Again, symptom of ADHD is being very overwhelmed by your emotions, and then needing to act on it. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you purge. It could be laxatives. It could be over exercise. It could be not eating the next day. But it's the reaction that you have to that distress that you're feeling in your body.
Yeah, and like the sensory component, that's one I'm always asking about if I'm assessing someone, whether I've even asked if they're neurodivergent or not. I just say like, do you have any sensory sensitivities? Which is another flag to me if they're like sensitive to not just like textures, tastes, sensations of food, but like the experience of eating. So like if an environment is like really bright lights and loud, or you can eat a meal by yourself, but when you eat with your family, it's extremely distressing. You don't eat very much because like hearing your family chew or like making sounds is so overwhelming that it makes eating really uncomfortable and unpleasant. Or you eat a very similar meal because that food feels like safe and familiar to you. And, maybe it's more sensory appealing to you, but other people in your family are eating more adventurous foods, which could come with like smells and, appearances that you've never seen before. And like seeing them eat that can be like, just not pleasant for you and impact your own eating experience. Or like if you haven't eaten all day, A very common symptom that I see a lot is like the pace of eating is extremely fast with ADHD. Um, Once they finally have committed to eating, it often is this like really intense eating experience and finishing before everyone else. Oh, I've been labeled a bottomless pit because I just keep eating.
Mm.
And like very much trying to, um, yeah, get the food in as quickly as possible, but it may not be like an actual binge. It's just like a quick eating because they haven't eaten enough earlier in the day, or they've been distracted with something else, or they didn't notice their hunger cues and now they're finally noticing them and they're really intense. And that's uncomfortable.
Even
So
you
yeah,
saying
teasing
that
those things
though,
apart is hard.
yeah, you saying that, I can just see how intertwined that sense of shame is with ADHD and
Yeah.
eating as well. Like that there's something wrong with you, that, you know, being
Mm-hmm.
called a bottomless pit, like is so derogatory. Or my husband has ADHD, so I can remember myself at times being like, you just ate your entire meal and he's ready to get up and go. Like he's back in the kitchen packing up lunches for the next day. And I'm like, can we sit at the table and all eat together? Like, why did you just leave? And he's like, well, I'm done. But I can see how there'd be such like negativity at the dinner table with how somebody might eat their food.
Totally. Yeah. And then, like, if you, for some folks who are neurodivergent, they also have rejection sensitive dysphoria. So, like, anything that they're experiencing sometimes from another person could be like seen as rejection. And then it can create this emotional response as well, which can be very dysregulating. And so it's like, why did you say that to me? Like, or why are you critiquing my food? Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I doing that? And it just like creates this even greater response, which then eating disorder behaviors are great coping tools for a lot of people in those situations.
Mm-hmm. You've given lots of great examples, but if you could imagine, you know, maybe a typical, even though it's probably not typical for every person, but what could a day look like for a woman with ADHD, and what might eating look like, especially during like a high stress or high distraction period?
This question made me laugh because so many times I'll ask a client at an assessment, I'm like, hey, tell me about a typical day of eating. And it's like, well, no day is typical. Every day is different. Um, or it can be like very repetitive and then it completely changes or a person gets derailed. So I would say like I'm often trying to help people figure out like what's their baseline. And their baseline is not this perfect way of eating. It's like what is the most familiar way of eating to you?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's like a breakfast you typically eat when you typically wake up, when you're like kind of managing your routine in a more structured way, and if you have more structured days than less structured days, and I'll usually start there. It's like let's use that as a baseline because you're already used to it. You probably like can do most things without thinking about it. Um, and so it may be like depending on the person's sleep. Some people with ADHD really struggle in the mornings. If they're on a medication, then like, and if they're not prioritizing eating, then taking a medication like a stimulant, it can work right away. So you might not feel hungry, and then just like getting all the things that you need to get done. So it could look like either like very routine or regimented eating, or it could look like chaotic eating,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not planned. Um, it's just like kind of grab and go. If you haven't gotten groceries, now there's nothing available. So there might be a lot more like lower effort foods, I like to call them, or like low barrier or accessible foods. So you might be like more reliant on like takeout, convenience meals, something that you just grab on the way, like a coffee and a bagel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then depending on how you do at work or school or whatever your routine is, like some people when they're doing something that like is really tied to their like values and their identity, they're like really pushing that, and so they might put the eating to the side because that's like interrupting that process. Other people might be highly distracted during that, and they might be more reliant on food throughout their day as a way to like stimulate themselves, or they're bored, or
Mm-hmm.
they're seeking out food as a way of coping. And then like I find evening time is usually like the highest vulnerability period for a lot of folks, but for ADHDers especially, like once you're done all the things that you need to do and you're just like alone with yourself and your thoughts, That's where I see a lot more like kind of like curious eating, chaotic eating, like food seeking behaviors, stimming with food. So, like seeking out more of a sensory experience with foods, like, oh, I eat all this candy at night and I don't know why. It's like, well, could it be that like sour candy is extremely stimulating and your brain is just like really liking that dopamine experience from the candy? Like, it might actually not be a binge. Um, and yeah, like depending on where their executive functioning might be at that baseline eating, kind of would explain like what their relationship with food is at that point. But then it's interesting to look at like how often are they burnt out, because burnout, like they need to have an idea of like when they get burnt out and like what's your plan to get out of burnout, and like how do you self-assess that I'm in a burnout right now. So that's like a skill that I teach a lot of people, of just like when you get into a burnout, because it would be normal and expected to get into a burnout when we live in a world that is just not designed for us. And
Right. So
like
like first off,
we
just
just
like
can't.
having empathy for yourself about that.
Yes, yeah, totally. And like, oh, like, you know what, I'm not operating at my baseline. I'm really struggling right now. Like, could I be in a burnout? Could I be struggling a bit more right now? And like that makes sense. Like just like yeah, really validating your experience. And then like what do you need? So like I'll often work with folks where it's like we're not meal prepping at that time. We're not getting all these groceries. We're not having a day of food prep. We're looking at the week of eating and just maybe scheduling more like low barrier options. Like, you know, the next 3 days you are going to stop and get a coffee and a bagel. And then at lunchtime, if it's accessible to you to like pick something up on your break or order something to for lunch or bring like a microwave meal or eat a frozen pizza, like whatever it is, just to make sure you're eating consistently. And then same thing with dinner. Like, could we plan like Tuesday and Thursday is DoorDash night? Monday is like deli salad, like whatever it is, like just trying to fill their day with regular eating. And then ideally, like thinking about like what's the sensations in your body. So if you're noticing like, oh, I have more energy when I'm doing that, I'm less stressed, I'm less overwhelmed. I'm now taking my medication again, or I'm now like showering again. If those things go out the window when you're in a burnout, and like really relating it to like how they feel in their own body, because they're the only person in the world who gets that experience, can be really motivating to help someone get back to their baseline, rather than being told like what you should do, what you need to do, what you need to motivate yourself for, which just like adds to their overwhelm.
You had so many like golden nuggets in there that I'm trying to like keep them roped up in my head so that I can mention them. But this is one of the biggest reasons that I wanted to have you on the podcast. One, as a dietitian, you know, formally trained, but in the specialty that you are in, because I hear so much, whether it's in you know, things that I'm seeing online, on social media, from nutritionists or even dietitians that are not specially trained in eating disorders, or intuitive eating, as well as like the amount that comes into my office from clients. But this feeling that, you know, processed foods or convenience foods, or like what you're calling low barrier foods, are just the devil and should not be eaten, and that we need to be pushing away from those. Like, to me, it's just so refreshing to hear like that's part of your strategy with your clients, because they're the reality. And it sounds like if you know that those things are already going to be something you're leaning on in those moments, that's a better choice than not eating. Or are there ways, if we already know that that's what it is that you're going to be eating, that you can bump up the nutrition or bump up the satisfaction of those things so that you don't feel depleted in a couple of hours?
Yeah. And like really just like tying it to like how do you feel in your body? Because like we already know if you have a complicated relationship with food, you're so disconnected from your body and you don't trust your body. So like working on getting that back is hard. But if you're also a neurodivergent person and like maybe you don't have as much interoception, or your interoceptive experience is different from like a neurotypical person, and so like you experience your body cues in different ways, it's just like really hard to like also build trust in your body and connect to your body, that your body's not against you, especially when we're living in this world that's not designed for us and there's all this shame attached to that. So I like just helping people like really connect to like when I'm in burnout, or when I don't eat consistently, or when I, you know, don't plan ahead and I eat, meals that aren't typically like what all the nutrients that my body needs in that moment, which is not a bad thing. It's just like, what does that feel like? Because if it feels in a way of like, oh, like I had a harder time concentrating today, or my ADHD symptoms were actually more amplified today, or my sensory sensitivities were amplified, or I just wasn't present with my family, or I was like really quick to get upset. Like if you can really relate it to that, it's like it's so much more motivating for someone rather than like reading it online of what you're supposed to do, or getting help or going to treatment and hearing like these are all the things you need to do, but then not being able to like actually implement them or even notice a change of like, when I do these things, it actually feels this way. And I like that feeling. So I want to continue doing that because that feeling is like really beneficial to me.
I like that of how does it feel in my body. It's personally something that I'm exploring as well. I do not have a diagnosis, obviously, of neurodiversity, but I very much relate to being like a highly sensitive person. I have 2 little kids and, I'm with them certain days of the week and whatnot. And I have even found now that the weather's nice, if my husband takes them outside while I cook dinner, that experience of just cooking in silence or listening to a podcast or an audiobook while I'm cooking really helps my nervous system calm down so that I can sit down at the table and eat with them and enjoy it. And it's a very different experience in my body than if there's a lot of chaos and noise as I'm trying to also do an activity like cooking.
Yeah, nice. I often will call that like a reset, like just taking a moment to like bring your nervous system down and like reset, especially if you get sensory overwhelm. Like it makes so much sense why we just need to like kind of get back into our body, like connect with something that helps us do that. Like cooking is such a good example of that, or listening to something, and then we can be more present shortly thereafter.
Yeah, it's the things that, I don't know if you have this experience talking with clients too, is like, these are not sexy strategies. Like, it's not going to be that thing that's going to, make me famous as a therapist to be like, do this thing. But it's like the things that actually work. And so it doesn't matter. If it just means that you have to tell your family to leave the house so you can cook for 30 minutes, like that made my life so much better for that, next couple of hours.
Totally.
This is something that I hear about a lot, and that is hyperfocus. And I've heard about it just in like other areas of daily functioning, like someone who loves video games or someone who gets really into a movie or a show that they're watching. But what does that look like around food? That moment when someone like looks up and maybe realizes that they've eaten a whole bag of something or skipped their lunch entirely. Like, what does that look like for the clients you work with?
Yeah, like when I think about hyperfocus, it's like what's the thing that you're doing and like what's contributing to the hyperfocus. So like a really good example is like my house is chronically messy, but if someone's coming over and I have to clean it, I go into like super power mode and I hyper focus on cleaning my entire house top to bottom, but I can't do it on a daily basis. It's just something that I chronically struggle with. So like with food, if someone's hyper focusing on food, typically everyone's experience is different. It's super subjective, but like a really common thing that I would see is like, I have a hyper focus of like a food that I'm eating. So it's very repetitive, or it's very like interesting combinations of food. Or like, I'm really I can't meal prep regularly, or I hate making dinner, but I can like hyper focus on making this like extravagant meal because I ate it in a restaurant and I can't get it out of my mind. And I'm thinking about it all the time and I just need to recreate it. And I've been researching it. So it's kind of like that. But when I think about someone who's like maybe like eating like a family size bag of chips and then feeling really guilty about it, I would want to assess that more of like, what was the eating pattern before that? Did you eat enough? Or did the food that you eat actually last you throughout the day? Or is it like being used up quickly because you're not having like regular balanced meals or snacks? Were you actually hungry for a meal at that point? And that's why you're eating the chips, because you just couldn't bring yourself to make a meal? Because that makes sense why your body wants a meal. It's going to try to seek that out in the food that's available to it. And I would also be curious if it's more like sensory seeking, like chips are salty and crunchy, And so like we start eating them and it provides this like response. And so we just keep going. So I don't know if it would be as much of like a hyper focus in that situation or more like the sensory driven piece, unless it's like I am really hyper focused on this one type of chip and it's the only chip I want to have and I'm having it regularly and it's all I can think about. That sounds more like hyper focus to me.
And I wonder too if this is a spot where just like non-neurodivergent binge eating can kind of overlap, because I talk to clients a lot about that they have their preferred binge foods. Like there's something that is a bit of a routine or a ritual almost around, these are the things I get, this is the order I like to eat them in. And like I think that maybe that is someone who has ADHD who's dealing with those things, or I wonder if there's just some similarities in that as well.
Yeah, I think I've probably asked every single person I've ever worked with for binge eating if they're neurodivergent, because just the way that they describe their experience with food for majority of folks, and it could be that they've sought me out because I work in this area, so there could be that added bias, but a lot of people that I work with binge eating, like they often are also neurodivergent, and there's that piece that's just tying into their relationship with food, and they've tried everything. Like it's not like they're not doing anything. They've tried so many things and nothing is really like helping them in the way that they need. And so that's often my first question is like, have you explored this? Like, have you done the self-assessment? Do the self-assessment and see, like, does any of that align with you? And then let's just consider it for your relationship with food. And I'll often just apply some of the strategies that I use with like ADHDers or neurodivergent folks and see if they respond well to it, and whether they have a diagnosis or not. Like I find we can make a lot of headway with some of those recommendations just because it provides a bit more of an objective way of experiencing food in a very like non-judgmental, experimental approach. That's what I often use with people, of just like, let's experiment. All information is helpful. It's all valuable information, whether it works or it doesn't. It tells us a lot about your experience. So just really trying to like get people to stop thinking that like I have a goal and it's either a success or a fail. It's like, no, it's an experiment, something we're trying out to collect information, and all information is helpful. And I want you to tell me about your experience, whether it works or not.
I really like that approach too. It's something that I also do with my clients, where maybe in the past they've been really burnt out with the dieting approach, where it feels like I am now fully in this diet and I have to let go of that previous way of being, and that all or nothing can feel so triggering. Or oh, I now have to do this thing every day. Like that just feels so daunting, versus let's do an experiment. See how this goes on Wednesday. Just pick a day you're going to do it. Test it out. How does it feel before and after? Let's talk about it. Let's like suss out that data. But it doesn't have to be that we do everything and now you're committed to it for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I love just like front loading clients, because like, I mean, working in private practice, it's like, oh, I made this plan and I didn't do it, so I'm going to cancel my appointment until I get it right and until I do my homework. And I'm like, I'll just front load, like, please do not cancel your appointments if the plan that we made did not work. Like, come to the appointment, let's talk about it.
Well, that's like, important information too, right? Like, why is it so difficult to do it? Like, there's something happening there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it tells us a lot about you and your experience, and it could just be that like some days you can do it and other days are like completely different days. So it sounds like we just need two plans.
Speaking of that, because I think that's where some of that shame comes in as well. You and I both work with women who carry so much shame around food. What kinds of self-talk are you hearing from your clients, and how do you help them shift that with that information that you have about how their brains are working?
I think like one of the most common things that I see is just like a really more like a moral response to food. So it's like, oh, I eat really well when I'm eating XYZ, or I'm eating quote unquote clean, or I'm eating good foods and I feel really good, and like that's like I just need to keep doing that. So they like associate that as their baseline. And it's like, but then they're like more driven to eat these other foods that they've associated as like quote unquote unhealthy or bad, or like processed or whatever it is. And so they're trying really hard to eat a certain way, but it's actually just setting them up to be more vulnerable to food seeking and then feeling worse about food. So I'm often kind of starting there of like, can we just call food what it is? Like a cookie is just a cookie. Chips are just chips. Like a salad is just a salad. A salad is not better than chips or a cookie. They're just different foods, and they have different nutrients, and they have different purposes. We couldn't just eat salad. We couldn't just eat cookies. Mm-hmm. I'm just like really trying to help people change their thinking around that as a starting point, because it's often just contributing like how they're thinking about food, and also how they're like treating themselves around food. Like, oh, I'm so bad, I did this, or I wish I could keep doing this, but I just like, I'm not motivated enough, or I don't have the willpower. It's like, no, none of that is true.
Mm-hmm. You just made me think of something that to me was a little bit of a light bulb moment, and I'm going to totally take it into my practice of, is it possible, like, let's say someone who is struggling with ADHD, they're like, okay, it's Monday, I'm going to get my shit together, I'm going to do all this planning, and they use like all of their effort to create this structure for themselves. And maybe, perhaps, there are things in that planning where they're able to recognize, oh, I don't know, I know I'm going to have a long work day, lots of meetings, I'm not going to have time to run out for lunch today, so I'm packing this thing. Maybe those are great strategies, but they so often, because of the way we're, cultured by diet culture of, mm-hmm. They pair that with the good food, air quotes. Like, yeah. They pair that with the salad. They pair that with the gallons of water and, all the things. And it's like, well, what if some of those things are great strategies, but you use them with greater variety of what you're eating? Because maybe that would be more sustainable, and that does feel really good. And you do feel on the ball, but it doesn't have to be because you're eating like a certain category of food.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, I think what stands out to me in what you said, it's like the intention behind it is where people are going to get derailed. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you always have that intention, even though you're using strategies that are really helpful, as soon as you get derailed, especially like ADHDers are often very black and white thinkers. And like, we can take things extremely literally. So it could be like, eat more of this food, which they try, but then it's like, well, I was doing it, but it wasn't working for me. And then it was like really hard to make, or I ate it once and I liked it. So I went to the grocery store and I bought like Costco sized bins of salad greens and all these things. And then I thought about making it incessantly. I made lists about it. I talked to myself of when I was going to do it, but I just never did it. And then it all went bad. And now I'm avoiding opening my fridge because it's a graveyard of salad greens in there. And it's the sensory ick is just way too high. And so I've just been eating DoorDash every day for the past 2 weeks, and I feel so bad about it. And now I spent all this money and I wasted it. It's like this constant like chain of things that is happening.
Yeah.
And it's all related to that like really good intention, but maybe like with the wrong language around it. Mm-hmm. And so if we could just like start with the language, I feel like people can be so much nicer to themselves. And then also just like just telling people to approach things with curiosity and not judgment. Like, we're just learning about ourselves and collecting information all the time. Mm-hmm. And you can't judge yourself. Like, if all the food goes bad, it's like, oh, that's actually really helpful information. Next time I'm not going to buy so much. Mm-hmm. Next time I'm going to have a plan around when I'm going to make this food in addition to when I buy it. And if I know it expires in 5 days, maybe it's not the right time to buy it.
Yeah. Yeah, like maybe there's certain things I don't buy at Costco versus I buy at another grocery store.
Yeah, or if I'm like really trying to like experiment and be adventurous with some of these foods that I just tend to like really struggle with, like, getting rid of when they go off, or like they make that experience really tough and I'm avoiding, it may be that I need to recruit a helper, that like when this is happening, I need a friend to come over and like body double me. So there's 2 of us to help me do a task that's really hard, mm-hmm. that I don't want to do, but is actually like significantly impacting my day-to-day functioning. And so I just need someone to be there with me so we could throw it away together and clean the container together, because otherwise like everything else is being impacted. Mm-hmm. And I just acknowledge I need a bit more help.
Mm-hmm. And being okay with asking for that help and recognizing mm-hmm. that will just get you past that hurdle, and now you can move on.
Yeah. I have some clients where when we start the call, I was like, if I do a virtual call, like, do we need to deal with anything in the fridge? I'm here to help you. And they're like, actually, yes.
Oh my God, I love that you offer that. Take your laptop to the kitchen and let's clean out the fridge together.
Yeah, I've done that with a few clients where they set their laptop up on the floor and they're like, okay, I've just got 3 containers. And we like the containers, we're going to keep them. because sometimes we do have to just like cut our losses of like, it does suck that we're not, you know, recycling and composting and we're throwing away something that is of value, but like you not feeding yourself for a month because of that container is not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Like we need to cut our losses and move on.
You're having me think too, and I know that like your role isn't to diagnose somebody with ADHD, but my experience working with women is that the traditional, I guess what some of the gatekeepers like teachers and family doctors even might be looking for, those criteria don't always meet what a woman might experience. And I'm noticing, like you're saying, like there's certain behaviors that might be more indicative or might be something that a woman might look at the list and be like, no, that's not me, but then really identify with what you're saying. Are there certain examples of impulsivity or the sensory overload or any of those things that you notice as more telltales for women?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So like just for like my own lived experience, like I was treated for anxiety for years and years and years. And I'm like, it's not working. Like, they're like, we just got to try harder. And I'm like, no, like, I don't think you understand. Like it really am struggling. And it's like, well, let's just try a little bit more. So I feel like I see a lot of people that they're trying really hard. They're being diagnosed with one thing. It's not being effective for them. And they're not exploring other options, or they just don't know that like some of these traits could be happening for them, or they're high masking and their burnout is so strong that they're being treated for depression. And they may also be depressed, but like it could also be that they're actually neurodivergent. I get a lot of referrals in my practice for postpartum women. So I don't know the research on this, but anecdotally, like my thought, and also like from my own experience of being pregnant and having a child, like the level of exhaustion you experience as like a new parent is so high. I think like it just brings out, like it amplifies your ADHD symptoms. Like if you're running on fumes, it just amplifies them. And so a lot of women are like, you know, maybe getting treated for like postpartum depression or anxiety, but they're still just not feeling better. And
I don't know the exact hormone. I don't know the exact hormone, but I did look it up because I had listened to a podcast from, find me on Instagram if you want the link to this podcast episode, but it was from a psychiatrist who works with women with ADHD. And she was saying that, I don't know if it's progesterone, estrogen, which one it is, but postpartum, as it has that sudden crash, and because you're in such a long recovery period, that really brings out the ADHD symptoms and affects the production of dopamine.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Like I would just like love to have more neuroscience under my belt. It's just so interesting. But yeah, I get a lot of these women up there like, I just learned I have ADHD. I've been struggling to feed myself forever. Like I can take care of my child. I can prioritize my child, but I can't get dressed. I can't shower. I don't leave the house. Like I'm really struggling with like breastfeeding or formula feeding, or I'm so overwhelmed with like starting solids. And so like often I'm getting a lot of these people who are getting diagnosed later in life just because the symptoms are more apparent at that stage, but maybe before they weren't as apparent. Other things that I tend to notice is just like, like if they do have like sensory sensitivities around food, or they'll say things like, oh, I've always been a picky eater. I've always been selective with my food, or I don't always feel hungry, or I've never really loved food. I've never been interested in food. And that might be more someone who's like autistic or ADHD. They just have a different experience with food, but they're like, everyone in my family is a foodie. Like I could take it or leave it. I just don't have that experience with food. Or like special interests sometimes, like some of the traits might not be as like telltale that they may assess for, but I think for me, and this may just be like an ADHD thing, like my brain is really good at picking up patterns, and like I might have poor short-term memory, but like I have really good long-term memory. And so like when I listen to someone speaking and I've met with them a number of times, I'm like thinking back of like my brain has like filed away every single session. And like, well, at this session you talked about this, and that session you talked about this, and this you talked about this. Like the pattern of all these things together like sounds very much like more impulsive behavior, executive functioning challenges, or emotional dysregulation. And obviously, like, not one of those things is like diagnostic for ADHD, nor could I do that outside of my scope. But it just like reflecting back the pattern to someone and just letting them think about it, and like, here's what I would do with a neurodivergent person. How does this land for you? Could we try it out? And then, you know, if you're interested in learning more, like, explore it with your doctor or do a self-assessment.
Yeah, so it's like you can use it as like you're collecting that data, but you're also encouraging them to do the self-reflection and see, well, does this work for you too?
Yeah. And they've often like tried so many things, and it's like, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but like, could we be curious about this? If you've tried everything and now you're talking to me, like, and you're wondering about it yourself, then like, here's some places to start. Like, I just direct people to the CADRA adult self-assessment, and then to have a conversation with their doctor about it and see like, what are their thoughts.
Yeah. Now there is this myth that intuitive eating won't work for someone with ADHD. What is your take on that?
I think intuitive eating needs to be nuanced for ADHD. So like, when I first read intuitive eating before I did the training, I was like some stuff I'm like, that makes perfect sense to me, and other stuff I was like, oh, I feel like that would be like really hard for me. Later, when I was diagnosed and then did the like intuitive eating counseling training, I had a very different perspective, and like, there's some things in the training that like, I think they just need to be adapted. And I also find the training, I love intuitive eating, but I feel like there's a lot of privilege in it. And a lot of the examples are like, you're at a dinner party and this food is provided. And it's like, some people are like, I've never been to a dinner party. I've never gone to a buffet. I've never been invited to something like that. I don't have that experience. And so one thing with like neurodivergent folks is because, and this is totally anecdotal, it's that black and white thinking. Sometimes they'll just read something and take it very literally, and it's like, that doesn't apply to me. This doesn't apply to me at all. The whole concept is out. So I have to like approach it in a way where it's like, the way that is worded doesn't apply to you. And like, could we think about it this way? And let's use an example that does apply for you, and try to like apply the concept. But I think it takes a good practitioner to do that, who has that lens. And then for me too, I'm just like, I'm always relating it to their body experience, because if they can really connect to their body experience and like, what does that feel like for me? And I'm the only person in the world who has that experience. I just find some of the principles land better for them, and the connection to their body lands better for them. And you can adapt it for like a neurodivergent brain and body and thinking, and also like call out when there's like clearly, you know, systemic oppression that makes it very hard for some people. That's just not addressed in the book.
Absolutely.
Or the practice.
Yeah. Speaking of that connection with your body, how do you think, or how do you work with women with ADHD to help them start trusting their hunger and fullness cues when they often feel disconnected with their bodies?
So I always use the concept of mechanical eating as a starting point. Well, I don't always use it. I pitch it, and if they're open to using it, we will usually use that framework. But I'll often just explain like what is happening in your body when you are underfed, and I'll go through like all the symptoms, and I'll explain like, and I'll use examples of things that they've told me to tie into like, this is what's happening in your body, this is why you might be feeling this way. And then if we can help somebody to get out of that place, and sometimes I'll call it like survival mode, or I often call it like, you're on the island. If you're on a deserted island, your body is going to try to conserve energy to keep you alive, and that's why you might be feeling this way. So I just often use this example of like, you're on the island. How do we get off the island? What do we need to do? And doing that is very hard, and it's also very uncomfortable. So like, a lot of acknowledgement that like, when you are underfed and you're coming to a renourished place, that could be really uncomfortable if you've been chronically doing that. So like, if your hunger and fullness cues are no longer reliable, if you feel nauseous all the time because you're not eating enough, if you feel like if fullness is really distressing for you, if you feel overwhelmed just like thinking about when you're going to eat next, like, it's really hard to just be like, oh, I'm just going to do X, Y, Z and be fine. So I have to provide a lot of like this is going to be difficult, but it's a temporary period of discomfort. And by us having a very strategic plan, it's going to shorten that period of discomfort. And it's always an experiment. So I'll teach them the skill of mechanical eating of just like, could we create a temporary structure to see as an experiment, like, do you notice a difference in how you're feeling when you do something more consistently? And then we might just tie in some habituation and just try to pick one thing to do more regularly and see if you notice a difference in like how you're feeling. Because that's where I get the buy-in of like, oh, I had a bit more energy. You're not making it up, Marilee.
Yeah.
I'll try it again.
Yeah. I was just thinking again, for anybody who is not familiar with our world of disordered eating, can you describe what mechanical eating is?
Yeah. So we call it a skill just because like it's a temporary way of eating when a person's body is quote unquote on the island or in an underfed state. Their body has gone into like a way of trying to conserve energy and they have all these symptoms. So they just feel disconnected to their body. And so we need a way to get back. So we create this like temporary structure or scaffolding of eating. And the reason we do that is because our brain is sending a hunger signal every 2 to 3 hours. And if we're not responding to it, and we're doing that chronically, it's going into this survival mode or this energy conservation mode. And a body that's not doing that or does it sometimes, it just adapts. You don't notice those things. And so that mechanical eating piece is like, let's create a schedule of eating, ideally like within an hour of waking up. Ideally every 2 to 3 hours after that, so that when your brain is sending this signal, you're responding in some way, even if it's the same food, even if it's not adequate, just so that your body starts to build trust that food is coming regularly. And then we gradually build it up, ideally towards meals and snacks, as someone's body adapts and feels okay to do that. And we do notice things like I have more energy, I don't feel as nauseous, my gut doesn't hurt as much, I sleep better, my anxiety is better regulated, or I'm more able to cope emotionally is a better way of saying that. But it's because we've created this like structure, and the word mechanical is kind of like saying like I'm eating a bit like a robot temporarily.
Yeah, it's like that. And I think for people who are interested in intuitive eating, that feels like a weird place to start, because you're like, what do you mean I'm supposed to listen to my body? But I'm definitely not listening to my body. But my experience has also been that with time, those hunger cues start to come back online and you're able to get a sense of them much better than when you've been ignoring them habitually.
Totally. And I guess that should be another caveat to how I use intuitive eating, is that like intuitive eating does not include mechanical eating. Intuitive eating includes the principles of intuitive eating and like gradually working towards a more intuitive relationship with food. The reason I use mechanical eating is like, one, it's commonly used in eating disorder treatment, but the response is faster. And so when I think about a person who is more impulsive or like, they're not fully bought into this idea, or they've tried a lot of things, a slow, gradual process, it takes a lot of time and trust to like buy into that. And especially if you're not from this realm of practice, there's a lot of concepts to understand that are really hard to understand. And so I feel like a lot of people I'll meet, they're like, I tried it and it didn't work. Or I am doing intuitive eating, and they're like in the thick of their eating disorder. So it's very much misused. So I will often say like, could we temporarily try mechanical eating as a way to just ensure that like we've ruled out malnutrition, we've ruled out this undernutrition, we could rule out that like hunger and fullness cues are not reliable, and like what does that feel like? Tell me about that experience. And then ideally, as they're doing it, then it's like, okay, what did it feel like when you're eating your lunch every day around noon, and then you forgot your lunch at home? What did that feel like? It's like, oh, it was so uncomfortable. I couldn't stop thinking about food. My stomach hurt. And it's like, that's not a bad thing. That's actually really helpful information. And when you've been doing it consistently, those cues are reliable. And it also helps you to problem solve in your brain. So it's like, that was really uncomfortable. So I'm more mindful of like making sure I have lunch tomorrow. And it could be too like, I'm going to be really nice to myself that when I get home today, it's normal and expected for me to eat faster. It's normal and expected for me to lack motivation to cook and prepare food. It's normal and expected to want more low barrier, quick, accessible, high energy foods because I'm in a significant deficit and that's uncomfortable for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like normalizing some of those eating behaviors as not like problems you have to fix. It's like, that makes sense. And I, once I kind of learned that and I have this now like body experience of that, ideally people are like using that in a helpful way rather than like shaming themselves around it.
It goes back to what you were saying before about, wanting to be more like aware of things and use it more as that experiment to be able to just like, let's see how this goes. It doesn't have to be forever. And let's learn more about ourselves and our bodies.
Yeah. And it's like that discomfort is like, that highlights how your body is communicating with you and how you're listening to it and what you're doing about it. Like that's building trust in your body. That's building resilience. Mm-hmm. And so like, I just like love to highlight that for people because they're like, I forgot my lunch and this happened and I think I had a binge. And it's like, whoa, let's back it up. Like, what was your experience? Like what led to that happening? Like, what did you do in the situation? And they're like, it was so uncomfortable. And it's like, wow, like that discomfort, that sounds really painful. And like not being able to focus on your work like really impacted your day, just like providing a lot of validation around that. And then it's like, what did you do after that? What did the next day look like? Well, like, oh, now I have extra food at work and now I keep food in my car and now I have food in my backpack and now I have this. I always have a card like to buy lunch. And it's like, you just implemented like 10 food skills and I didn't tell you any of those things. And they're like, oh, right. Which is so awesome to see because like people already know how to eat. They don't need a dietitian to tell them how to eat. They know. They just need support figuring it out in a way that is sustainable for them, that they can feel confident with, and they can learn to trust their body and not listen to all the noise around us that's really complicated and confusing.
That's so nice. Like, I know you're like talking yourself out of a job, but obviously you are the resource that they're needing in that moment to be able to have that confidence in their own abilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm curious. So episode 3 of the podcast, I talked about Vyvanse and how Vyvanse works on the brain, and then also how it can actually disrupt some of the hunger cues that we're receiving and potentially lead to more of that binging if you're not eating throughout the day. What is your experience on medications like Vyvanse, Adderall, how they affect appetite, and how women can navigate that without falling into restriction or binge cycles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So like, I wish in the future if I could reconstruct the medical system, it should be mandatory that every person who is prescribed a stimulant be assessed for disordered eating and be prescribed a dietitian to help them navigate how they're going to feed themselves when they have no appetite. Because you will have periods of not having an appetite. And it might not be the fact that like your appetite is just suppressed. It's like your brain is finally working in a way that like it hasn't worked for a long time. For some people, like stimulants don't work for everybody, but for some people that they're like, wow, like I know people who've cried after taking stimulants because they just felt so much clarity in their brain and quietness in their brain, which oftentimes gets, I don't know, people get confused in the sense they think that doesn't happen, where it's actually going to make the noise louder, but it creates a lot of quiet. So you're actually focusing on other things. So I think it just makes you really vulnerable to either not eating enough or not prioritizing food, or if you have a complicated relationship with food in your body, there's this like hope that if I eat less, I'll lose weight and that I'll just get to this place that I want to be and there'll be no consequences and everything will be great. But typically people just feel so horrible all the time. So like, I wish they would see a dietitian so we could talk about like, how are you going to plan your day where like, if you struggle to remember to take a medication, oftentimes people have like a routine where they're taking it as soon as they're like waking up out of bed, just because they don't want to forget it. If they start anything else, they'll forget it. And it's like, that's great. And how are you going to prioritize eating? So it could be that like I take my medication with like a boost or an Ensure or some sort of drink that's going to provide some nutrition to at least like get it started. And then I'm going to commit to like eating a breakfast, and maybe it's like a familiar meal. It's very similar to what you often do. It's low barrier because you may not feel hungry in the moment. And like I'm committing to eating that and thinking about how like for my medication to work effectively, I need to be nourished.
Mm-hmm.
For my brain to work the way that I want it to on this medication, I need to be nourished. And so like really pushing yourself, and so like leaning into mechanical eating to push ourselves to eat something even though we may not be as interested in it or feel hungry for it, to get that in. And then thinking about like your midday, because I think I see the biggest issue is midday,
mm-hmm.
because probably the half-life of the medication is like at its peak at that point, and or we're like the most focused on the thing because we're finally like getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like getting started can be hard for ADHDers. So like once you're finally like into it, you don't want to interrupt it, which is fair. And eating is not a body cue that we can like it doesn't have a time limit in terms of how we ignore it, like peeing does. You know that if you have to pee and you ignore it too long, there's a consequence. Just like with eating, but it's often more delayed and your body adapts in a different way. But yeah, so ideally you've kind of committed to like a mechanical eating plan, or you have like more supplemental nutrition, like you're going to use like a meal replacement drink or something during the day, or you're trying to prioritize like more novel foods, mm-hmm. because ADHD brains love novelty. So it might be like I'm going out to eat at lunch if that's accessible to you, or purchasing something, or I've committed to mechanically eating this lunch that I've brought, or I have more snacks over the day because those are more accessible to me and I'm more interested in them. And then just experimenting with it and making sure you're getting enough, because if you don't, common symptoms are kind of the same idea of like malnutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you feel nauseous all day, if you feel dizzy, if you're not able to focus, if you're really like quick to frustration and emotional dysregulation, like all those pieces can be tied to not being nourished enough throughout the day because you're taking this medication. And the part that's the hardest is that if someone is losing weight and they are malnourished, a doctor will pull a medication. So now something that's really helpful for you is being taken away like a punishment, mm-hmm. because you didn't have adequate support to know that you needed to prioritize your nutrition to be able to take this medication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think if anybody, I agree with all of that. So many other things I could talk to you about in terms of, what would be the ideal scenario of how people are prescribed medications and how can we all work kind of as a collective team. But the other things that I also see too are that the medications are often wearing off by end of the work day. Mm-hmm. We're coming home and you now don't have any like fuel in the tank left to be able to cook that dinner. And so you're just set up really for a binge to happen. Especially mm-hmm. when you're now starving after not eating all day.
Yeah, exactly. So like one thing I didn't mention with like that, when we're in that survival mode or we're on this island, is that like when we do finally have access to food, the drive is going to go up significantly and our body's going to try to play catch up. And it can play catch up for like days before. It's not just like a 24-hour period and we reset like a clock. Mm-hmm. It's like if you haven't eaten enough in the days leading up to it and you're finally in a place where food is more accessible to you, it could be that your body's going to try to make up for all those periods of a deficit in one go, and then that could be really distressing, mm-hmm. obviously, and uncomfortable and create a lot of shame. So for some people, like it is a bit of a journey of self-discovery with your doctor around like how your medications are working, how long they're lasting, if they're effective for you. I know some people will do like non-stimulant ADHD medication top-ups later in the day. That can be hard if you can't remember to take them. Trying like short-acting versus long-acting medications. Having more of a plan in the evening time, or like just really committing to a nutrition plan during the day when you're on a medication that can reduce appetite. Because if you mechanically eat, like your hunger cues will come back. Mm-hmm. They will be more reliable. You just have to go through this like transitional period with consistency around eating where like, I don't feel as hungry. And you might have to play around with the dose. Like if the dose is too high and you feel really gross or you're not hungry enough, then like it's probably too high. So you might have to lower the dose and make sure you're able to get enough nutrition. And then that might really be protective in the later day or evening when it's wearing off. Mm-hmm. As well as making sure your sleep is okay. Because if it's impacting your sleep, that's also going to impact how you're feeling throughout the day and how you're able to feed yourself.
Mm-hmm. Like it sounds like what you're saying is you want this medication, if that's your choice, to take the medication to be additive to your experience, not something that ends up derailing you or adding more negative symptoms physiologically, because sure, it's maybe helping your focus or helping you with problem solving or organization or whatever the tasks are that you think that you need to be using it for, but there could be a lot of ramifications that you do need to be mindful of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And one thing I feel like is not talked about, and this is like anecdotal, but sometimes people experience a regression after they get diagnosed later in life, where it's like, oh, I finally know like the reason I, act the way that I do or think the way that I do, or some of these behaviors, like they're related to ADHD. Like it makes sense to me. That's actually really like freeing. They might go through like a grief period of like, what my life could have been like if I had these answers sooner.
Mm-hmm.
But they also might go through like a regression of like, I didn't realize that me meal prepping was actually masking. And now that I know it's ADHD, like I understand that, I don't need to mask anymore, or
Mm-hmm.
I can actually just rely on some of these things, or the reason I choose these things related to my ADHD. And that can sometimes be really frustrating and overwhelming to people.
Mm-hmm. I imagine too, like if
So,
you're in a partnership, or that's also difficult, right? Because it's maybe
yeah.
feels freeing or self-compassionate to unmask and say, I'm just going to be authentic to who I am. But now this person is acting in a very different way.
Yeah, definitely. And like, if you're like, you're starting to feel more like yourself, you're like, you understand your identity a little bit more, but also it can be really confusing because now some of these things that were really protective before, you can't access them in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And so people like, they're like, oh, I'm feeling less overwhelmed in these areas, but now I'm feeling more overwhelmed in these areas. And I just like can't get to like a place where there's like calmness, like there's always something. And like, that's really stressful for me. And all of it is impacting like your relationship with food.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about like what the work with your clients looks like. When someone is functioning at their best, what does a peaceful relationship with food look like for someone with ADHD, and how do they maybe feel in their body?
Oh, that's such a nice question. I think like when someone with ADHD has a peaceful relationship with food, they're more connected to their body in a way where their body gives them information and they're able to respond to it. And responding to it doesn't mean doing the perfect thing. It's like, I need to feed myself right now, regardless of whether it's, a baseline meal when I have high energy to an accessible meal. Like I just need to feed myself. What does that feel like? And like being proud of yourself that like you responded to your body's needs in a way that was compassionate. I think just like recognizing when you are veering towards burnout or in a burnout period or coming out of a burnout period, of just being like really kind to yourself and just adapting things. If you recognize you're getting derailed, because that happens a lot, of like I was doing something, it was working, and then I got derailed and now I feel like nothing works. Again, like being really kind to yourself and like reviewing like what are your values and goals, like what are the things that are truly important to you, not like what other people want from you, like just what, like who are you.
Mm-hmm.
And then like how can we tie things to that. So like if we know eating more regularly is extremely hard, but it gives me more energy, and more energy allows me to like be present with my family and do art and get outside, and I wasn't doing that before. It's like, let's lean on that. Like, let's really connect to that so that when you're doing more of those things, it's like that feels really good. And I don't have to do it in a perfect way. I'm just doing it in a way that is like effective for me.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I can still want to improve that. I can still try to do things to improve that, but I'm not so black and white in how I'm doing it and shaming myself. I think too, just like surrounding yourself with people when possible that allow you to be your authentic self, because masking can be really challenging. And sometimes we work in areas that we just have to mask. Like I have neurodivergent friends who are teachers. They love they love being a teacher. They love their kids, and they find it extremely exhausting because being a teacher and taking care of a group of people is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're quite exhausted, and I don't get to see them as much as a friend, but I know that about them, and I know it's not like a personal thing against me. It's just they're just trying to take care of their own energy, and I love that they recognize that about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like eating foods that you enjoy, being nice to yourself if you eat differently. Like if you eat the same thing all the time and that it works for you, that's fine. If you know that there's a possibility that you're missing something, like approach it with curiosity, treat yourself with kindness, and like try to find a way of mitigating that's like helpful for you. But it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to only eat Canada's food guide or only eat a certain way to be a healthy person. And also, like, what does health even mean to you?
Yeah, I hope that from listening to this episode, someone, if they are not currently working with a dietitian or that type of thing, like I think it can be really tempting to go, like you said, if someone sees things in more of a black or white way, to go to something that's incredibly restrictive and I'm just going to follow this meal plan. And but I hope that that person is able to find a dietitian like you, Marilee, or somebody within their area, so that there are more possibilities. It doesn't have to be such a rigid approach. Speaking of that, where can people go if they want to learn more about you? I know that you have a group coming up, or if they want to get support tailored to both ADHD and food freedom.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Marilee_dietitian or at Spuds Nutrition. So my private practice is Little Spuds Nutrition. We have a website. It's www.littlespudsnutrition.com. And we support people across the lifespan. So we work with neurodivergent families and kids and adults and anyone working on their relationship with food, or parents trying to support their kids to have a healthy relationship with food, or work on their own undoing some of the traumas that they've experienced with their relationship with food and trying really hard not to put that onto their kids. You can find me there.
Yeah. And then I know you had mentioned that you have a group coming up. Did you want to say a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So I'm in the process of creating a group for kind of like nutrition for ADHD. And it's still in the works, but it's almost there. But it's going to look like a small group of people kind of going through some of the principles of like doing that self-assessment, learning about mechanical eating, learning about how their ADHD traits influence their relationship with food, and then ideally creating some accountability of just experimenting with some, things that people want to work on together, and like learning from each other of like what's working for you, what's not working for you, and kind of building off of that. And the hope would be that I could run this group and ideally help people to just build more food skills and accountability so that they don't need a dietitian, which is such a funny thing to say in a business. But I just really want people to understand that like they have the skills, they just need a bit of support. And the hope is that they could redo the group if they wanted to. If they just needed a little booster, like if they went through a burnout, they could come back and do it and just get back on track.
That sounds amazing. I will definitely be staying tuned for whenever you get that live. But until then, I'm assuming that people can find you on Instagram or on your website to express interest in that so that they're notified when it goes live.
Yeah, definitely get in touch. And I have a wait list going right now, and I'm happy to add people to it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Marilee. It's been nice to talk to you in this context. And thank you for everything that you've provided to the listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great. I feel like this is such a needed conversation, and I look forward to hearing how people take it in.
Yeah, for sure. I'll talk to you again soon. Marilee, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your warmth, and your expertise today. I know our listeners will walk away feeling both seen and equipped with new ways of thinking about their relationship with food. If you want to learn more about Marilee's work, you can find her at Little Spuds Nutrition, or on Instagram at Marilee_dietitian and at Spuds Nutrition. You can find all of these details in the show notes. And if today's episode resonated with you, if you felt that mix of shame, frustration, and disconnection with food, I want to invite you to take a gentle first step with me. My mini course, Food Freedom in a Weekend, is designed to help you begin untangling diet culture, reconnect with your body, and discover a more peaceful way of living. It's a great place to start if you're ready to shift out of that all or nothing cycle. You can learn more and join me at meredithmckenzie.ca/food-freedom. Thanks for tuning into One Body to Love. If you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.